profile names to suit your privacy preferences. As standard protocol and aligned with the community values, we urge everybody to be as respectful, honest, inclusive, accommodating, appreciative, and open to learning from everyone else. And before we begin, I'll pass the floor to my colleagues, Ashoka and Subhashish, for brief introductions. Over to you,
Thanks,
Ashoka.
Meghna. Thanks, Meghna. Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's really good to see all of you here. We're very excited for this presentation today. My name is Ashoka, and I work alongside Subhashish and Meghna at the Law for All initiative in Ashoka, and I particularly focus on the venture and fellowship team, where we sort of recruit fellows for the Ashoka Fellowship. And we're always looking for recommendations. I'm just going to, in a second, post a link. If you have anyone in mind that you think would be a good fit for our fellowship, please feel free to nominate them. Thank you. Passing it on to Subhashish.
Thank you, Ashika. Hi, everyone. So nice to meet you all. And thank you particularly the India Justice Report. We are very honored to have you all with us, and really looking forward to listening to all of you, learning from all of you. My name is Subhashish. I lead the Ashoka Law for All initiative, which is a program that searches, selects, and supports young and other social entrepreneurs who are making innovations in the legal system and are trying to make it more accessible, inclusive, and effective, particularly in India. And the Law for All program is also equipping such innovators we call change makers in the law and justice sector with resources and networks. As Ishika mentioned, we welcome your recommendations for social entrepreneurs in your network that you would recommend to us for the Ashoka Fellowship. And I'm going to share my email in the chat so that you could reach out to us, reach out to me for anything to discuss regarding the program or even to recommend. With that, I'll pass it back to Meghna for the rest of the talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Subhashish. And it is with great pleasure and excitement that we introduce this event's esteemed panelists and the India Justice Report. The report is first of its kind national periodic reporting that ranks how well the governments of 18 large and 7 small states have equipped their formal justice systems to administer justice to a reasonable standard. The presentations of the key findings will be from Dr. Vijay Raghavan, Director of Prayas, a field action project of Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Prayas is an organization dedicated to transforming the lives of vulnerable groups coming in contact with the criminal justice system. And Ms. Maya Daruwala, Chief Editor for the India Justice Report, Senior Advisor, Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative. And for over 25 years, Ms. Daruwala has also served as the Executive Director of the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative. She's part of several charitable boards in India and abroad, including Open Society Justice Initiative in New York, Namati, to name a few. And we also have Mr. Gagan Sethi, a recognized leader in policy formulation, an advocate for minority rights, women empowerment, youth employment, and education. With over 30 years of experience in organizational development, capacity building, and advocacy. He's the founder of Jan Vikas and has helped set up several organizations in the country, like Center for Social Justice, Sajivan, and Drishti, to name a few. He will also be shedding light on the impacts of COVID-19 on justice delivery in the session. So very, very warm welcome to you all. And with that, I'll pass the floor to our speakers to quickly say a few words, and then we can move on to participants' introductions.
Okay, I'm Vijay Raghavan. I teach at the Center for Criminology and Justice at Tata Institute of Social Sciences in the School of Social Work. And I've been in this field for now more than 32 years. I have been one of the founder members of Prayas, which is a field action project of TISS, Center for Criminology and Justice, which works with vulnerable populations who come in contact with the criminal justice system towards their legal rights and their rehabilitation. Essentially, we work in 2 states, Maharashtra and Gujarat, but we also have a footprint at the national level, but that's more at the policy level. I think that should be enough. Thank you.
I was Just saying, thank you, Dr. Raghavan. And I was saying that if either you or like Mr. Sethi, whoever wants to go first for a few words, and then we can have participants introduce themselves and their organizations.
Meghna,
Thank you.
sorry, Meghna, you've already introduced me. I'm Gagan, and happy to be here talking to Ashoka. I've been associated with it off and off in a larger way many times. And yeah, just look forward to having this conversation with all of you.
Yeah, and I'm introduced and it's done.
Awesome. Thank you both. And with that, we'll have the participants introduce themselves and the organization. I see Internet Freedom Foundation, Digital Empowerment Foundation in our audiences. Either of you would like to take the floor?
I'll go first. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, my name is Apar. I'm the Executive Director at Internet Freedom Foundation. Most of our work is in the legal and the policy domain. Okay. So most of the work which we do is in the policy and the legal domain. For instance, there's been a recent law called the Criminal Procedure Identification Bill 2022. So there are large overlaps today about criminalization and the implementation of modern technologies. This is the intersection we quite often work at. I'm looking forward to learnings and also any open conversation which happens subsequently.
Osama, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, this is Osama Manzar from Digital Empowerment Foundation. We don't know about the legal aspect, but we work mostly to access digital rights and human rights and individual rights through digital access for the most marginalized people. That's the area we work in.
Thanks, Osama. Anybody from Reap Benefit wants to go very quickly? I see representation from them.
Hi, I'm Roshan D'Souza from Reap Benefit. We strive to kind of do social action through youth.
Awesome. Thanks, Roshan. If nobody wants to go after this, I can pass that back to Dr. Raghavan for the presentation. The floor is yours, Dr. Raghavan.
Okay, so thank you once again on behalf of the India Justice Report team for making this conversation happen. I will introduce the India Justice Report, and then Maya will take over from the slides which we talk about the findings of the India Justice Report over the last 2 years. So this is an exercise which we started ideating sometime in the year 2018. 6 organizations which are working in the access to justice space. We came together under the aegis of the Tata Trusts. They brought us together and we started discussing the need for a report where all the pillars of the criminal justice system, which is the police, the judiciary, the prisons, and the legal aid, data could be made accessible in one space, in one platform. And also we thought that it was good to have a report where there is some kind of ranking of the states in terms of their capacity to deliver justice. So this is how the idea of the India Justice Report came about. And we've now produced 2 reports, 2019 India Justice Report and 2020 India Justice Report. What does the India Justice Report try to do? It creates a credible matrix to access the state's capacity to deliver justice, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of human resources, in terms of what it is supposed to do as a wing of the criminal justice system. The important thing about the India Justice Report is that it is not a survey-based research, which I would like to bring here. There is no primary data collection that the report is trying to do. What it is trying to do is look at statistical data or secondary data, which has been already published by government sources. And this we did very consciously because of the fact that whenever we come up with any kind of report which does ranking of states or institutions, etc., there is always an issue about how credible the data is. And, we didn't want to get into those kind of issues and controversies. And therefore, we decided that we will go by official data, which is published by the government of India. And therefore, then, of course, this is not to say that there are no gaps in data and that data published by the government sources are all very perfect. That's definitely not the case. We know that even NCRB data, there are a lot of gaps in the way when it is published every year. But nevertheless, whatever is available, we will try and put it together and see how it could become more user-friendly for people who are working in the access to justice space. It was also an attempt to bring together the siloed subsystems that contribute to the justice delivery system, because as we all know that many of these different wings of the justice system, they don't necessarily talk to each other. And even the reports that come out, they are all separate. So you have the Crime in India report, which is brought out by the NCRB, which is looking at crime data and statistics. You have the in prison statistics of India report, which is coming out again by NCRB. And then there is the data relating to judiciary, which is usually there in the e-courts or the National Judicial Data Grid, etc. Legal aid, of course, there is no official data published by NALSA every year, apart from the fact that they do come up with various kinds of reports which are available in their website. We also went to data which was being published by the Bureau of Police Research and Development, and some amount of data was brought out through the RTI applications. So the idea is to create some kind of a healthy competition between different states to look at where they stand with regard to the different pillars of the criminal justice system. So what we have done so far is that one is this flagship report, which we have brought out, 2 reports, 2019 and 2020. We also have fact sheets of each states. So if there is a particular state which is interested to know details about how that particular state is doing on the different pillars of the justice system, we also have those kind of data that is available in a neat way that can be understood more easily. We came out recently with a report on the prisons in January 2022, because the latest report of the Prison Statistics India 2020 had come out, and that we decided that we should use that and come up with what has been the changes since the last India Justice report that we had published. So that's a new addition to the kind of reports that we've been coming out. And we also did a budget analysis report, which came out in Jan 2022. So what have we tried to do through this report is there are 4 clusters, but essentially there are 2. One is the states which we have ranked, and these are into one category called large and medium states, and the other is the smaller states. There are 18 large and medium states that are ranked, and there are 7 small states which have been ranked. The reason that we did that was we realized that it's not fair to compare apples with oranges, and so the medium and the large states are put in a separate category, and they've ranked them, 18 of them, and the smaller states have been ranked separately, independently. We also have another cluster of unranked states. These are states which are in the states where the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is in operation. And we felt that it would not be fair to rank these states along with the other states, because the justice delivery system in these states would be different. For example, if you want to look at the police population ratio, it would be higher in these states, and that would pull up the rank of the state without actually reflecting the reason why these states have such a high population of policing. And we also had a separate cluster of the union territories. Again, the union territories are directly administered by the government of India, and therefore we felt that it is not fair to rank them. But however, the data relating to these unranked states and union territories is already there in the India Justice Report. So as I've already said, we so far have ranked the 4 pillars: police, prisons, judiciary, and legal aid. And in the next report, which we are planning to come out with, we plan to bring also include forensics and the state of the human rights commissions in those states. In terms of the themes, these are the broad themes which we are trying to look at. Under each pillar, we look at budgets, we look at human resources, we look at infrastructure, we look at workload, and we look at diversity. When I mean diversity, it essentially we are talking about women and we are talking about SC/ST populations. Also, we are looking at a whole lot of indicators which have been derived through a very thorough discussion that we did. And we started off with a huge number of indicators, but the issue was also comparability. And so looking at that factor, we identified some indicators which were comparable across the 4 pillars that we have come out with. So this is what this report tries to look at. What are the sources of data? This is just for your information. Like I already said, that the data uses, the report uses only official data. For police, the data is sourced from the police organization data which is published by the Bureau of Police Research and Development. For prisons, the data is sourced from the Prison Statistics India report, which is published by the National Crime Records Bureau. For the judiciary, the data is sourced from the National Judicial Data Grid, and also from the e-courts, the Court News, Supreme Court of India, websites of high courts, Department of Justice, through the right to information, and which have been filed by Vijay Center for Legal Policy, which is one of our partners of this project. And as far as legal aid is concerned, we have been able to get data from the National Legal Services Authority. They have been very supportive and cooperative, and whatever data that we've asked for from them, they have given us that data. And that is how all the data sources are looking at as of now. One of the important aspects that we had to figure out in terms of, because we were doing ranking of states and the large and the small states, was how do we set benchmarks? So basically, we had a ranking system where we gave scores out of 10 for each of the indicators that we were trying to put together. So we needed to look at benchmarks. And so how did we go about it? One of the sources was the benchmark was, what does the law say, or what does the statute say? For example, when we are looking at reservations, it is as per the statute, SC/ST, OBC reservation. So whether within the police force or within the prisons, whether the reservation policy is being implemented, what is the actual number of people who have been hired from these communities vis-a-vis what should have been hired as per the reservation policy. In some cases, it is like policy statements. For example, in the case of reservation for women, these are policies which have been declared by the various state governments. So some states have, said up to 33%. Some states have said 30%. Some states have been more than 33%, etc. So we've looked at whatever they have identified as their policy, and then looked at the actual number of women who are present in these pillars of the justice system. Another source for developing benchmarks was government policy documents. For example, when it came to prisons, there is the Model Prison Manual 2016, which lays down a number of benchmarks. For example, what should be the staff to prisoner ratio, or what should be the medical officer to prisoner ratio, what should be the correctional officer to prisoner ratio. And those kind of things have also been looked at when deciding benchmarks. Now, despite trying all this, there was still a lot of the indicators that did not have benchmarks. So in those cases, what we did was just use plain simple logic. So in some cases, higher the better, and in some cases, lower the better. So that is how the benchmarks were worked out. What we have found across the board, across the country, is there in this slide. We find that participation of women across the justice system is very low. It hovers around 10% or even less than that, particularly as far as prisons and police is concerned. In the judiciary, the participation of women at the lower courts is far, far better, but at the high courts and Supreme Court, again, the numbers are very, very low. In terms of vacancies, we find across the board, across the pillars, which is police, prisons, and judiciary, the vacancies are in the region of 20 to 30%. And states, if you look at, there are certain states where the vacancies are really high. I can recall that as far as, say, Uttarakhand is concerned, the vacancies of staff positions at the officer level is up to 60%. And in terms of medical positions, in some of the states, including Uttarakhand, I think it is up to 70%. So that really is a very worrying kind of a trend that comes out from the national findings. Another finding which one finds is when it comes to prison populations, the occupancy rate has kind of stagnated around 120%, which means that if a prison is built to capacitate 100 prisoners, on an average, there are 120 prisoners in that prison. But this does not reflect the true picture, because there are the prisons in the big cities and towns where the overcrowding is 3 to 5 times, depending on the prison that we are talking about. And another finding, which of course this is known to everybody, that under trials constitute about 70% of the prison population, which in the last 1 year has actually gone up to 75%. The per capita spend on legal aid, it tells us if legal aid is something that, as per the law, as per the National Legal Services Authorities Act, legal aid should be available to nearly 80% of our population, because legal aid is supposed to be given free of cost to women, children, SCs, STs, OBCs, minorities, persons with disability, and anybody in custody. So that figure would go up to 80%. And also people where the annual income is below a certain amount, and that depends from state to state. So when one looks at all of that, you come to a fact that it's nearly 80% of India's population which is eligible to get legal aid. But if you look at the per capita spend on legal aid, it's in the region of 1 rupee 27 paise, and this was in 2022-23. It rose a little bit from the 2019-20 when it was 1 rupee 5 paise. Again, in terms of the quotas for SC, ST, OBCs, especially in the police department, for which data was available, except Karnataka, no state in India has completed the quota that they are supposed to complete. Again, in terms of judge population ratio, we now stand somewhere in the region of 21 judges per 10 lakh population. And that is as far as 2020 is concerned. And the high courts and the cases that have actually gone up in 2022, the pendency of cases has gone up by 10%. And in the subordinate courts, it has gone up by 5%. And a very shocking figure is the correctional staff vacancies in prisons, which stands at around 40%. So I'll hand over now to Maya, and she'll take over from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Vijay. I'll go to the next slide, which tells you who won and who lost. This is a comparison between the figures that you saw in the 2019 report and the 2020 report. And one of the things I wanted to just mention is that not all the figures that we got from these various sources are up to the same year. So you might have a report on the police which goes up to 2020, but you might have a report on budgets that is only looking at budgets in 2017-18. So what we have said in the report is that we will use all the data that is the latest data, which is publicly available, latest government data, which is publicly available. Ideally, one of the things that the India Justice Report and people who look at it and want to use it or want to advocate on it should be looking at how much data is there and how much data is not there. And how do you force states that are mandated to keep the public informed about budgets and all of the other things, human resources and so on, why do they not keep them up? why do they not keep up with all of the information, especially since the coming into effect of the right to information, section 4, much of what we are struggling to find should be up on the websites. And now it has been many, many years since that right to information report came up. So going back to just what's on the slide, so who won and who lost? You can see that from the small states, there was a lot of change. Tripura was number 1 in 2020, whereas it was 7 in 2019. So there may have been several things it did to improve itself, and I'll come back to that. So there was a fair amount of changing and chopping in the smaller states. But in the larger states, in both years' reports, Maharashtra came first and Uttar Pradesh came last. And in between, there were several jumps and several states stayed the same. Punjab, for instance, stayed the same. Uttar Pradesh and Maharashtra, as I've just pointed out. Kerala, which one would think of as a more developed or advanced state, still lost 3 places. And Bihar came up from 17th to the 13th. The reason I'm pointing this out to you is the advocacy around this report that we do also says that look at your indicators and see what there is that is, because the disaggregated data leads you to seeing the small areas in which, if you make an improvement, what everybody likes to call low-hanging fruit, can you make a slight improvement or a big improvement in something that will offset some of the negatives and you will change your ranking? To give you an example, the diversity profile in Kerala did not change much, and therefore their change was not a great deal. But the diversity profile in the police population, police women, in the inclusion of women in Bihar, went up very sharply to 23%, which is really quite surprising. And there is a story to be investigated there about, once you have the women in, how do you accommodate them? How do you make sure there's a welcome for them in the police? What work are they doing? But that is for other people to take off from this report, because this report, as has been emphasized, is strictly one that uses statistics to come up with rankings on capacity. So if we keep to that, then it's a resource for various people to take off from there and investigate much more. The aggregated data gives you a picture of governance in the area of justice delivery. Kindly look at the extreme right-hand side of both the small states and the large states. You will see that after we had mashed and rebased the figures, the absolute figures, we got them down from 1 to 10. Everything, so that we did not have any biases of our own introduced into the report, every indicator had a value of 1 from 1 to 10. Nobody got, we didn't say that we like people who put women who have a better diversity profile, so we will give them 2 marks instead of 1. All indicators had the same weightage. When we mashed them all together and our statistical partner, How India Lives, then developed a matrix which would show us a ranking which we could defend anywhere, we found that even the best states had never came up to 6 on 10. 5.77 is Maharashtra, and that is lower than they were last report, which was 5.92. Uttar Pradesh remained with 3 3.5, 3.2 was like that. And in the small states, Meghalaya, etc., you don't even get up to 5, even though Tripura is the best state. Again, that tells a story that requires or calls out for investigation of why even small states where the populations are low, but also budgets are low and the difficulties of finding manpower, etc., are there, why they cannot, why smaller is not helping them to be better in justice delivery. And if anybody were interested, one could go into in each of these indicators or in each of these states why they went up or down. But suffice it to say for the moment that these are indicators that show which, if changed, can change your ranking. Now, does it matter that you change your ranking? Well, it does matter to the people who govern these states. They don't want to be seen at the bottom of a chart. So it does set up a matrix for competitiveness. But really speaking, what a state government should be able to show is that on year, we improved for our own populations, not because Orissa, we wanted to beat Orissa or we wanted to beat Jharkhand, but because we wanted to produce the best that was possible for Madhya Pradesh and to make that effort. So we hope that those ideas will percolate down into the bureaucracy. I'm sure that they are already there, but giving it public viewing helps. Now, I like to show this slide to show the difference between, or to show the importance of data really. What is the difference between rhetoric? We say that we want parity, we want equality, we want equity in our governance. We want to reach the magical figure of 33% women in police. And we would like to do the same with all of the other pillars. But in police, there is actually a benchmark. So here is 33% police, women in police. But what is the practice on the ground? The practice on the ground is like this. If you have a vacancy of 100 and you recruit, you restrict who you can take in terms of gender, women, to only 30% of that or 33% of that. Now, if you continue this practice, it will take all of these states, the ones with the long spikes, it will take Madhya Pradesh 180 years to get to 33%. Because Bihar changed its policy and then did a mass recruitment, it changed from the possibility last report of 18 years to 3 years. So if they continue like that, they will reach their magical figure of 33%. Why it is a magical figure, I don't know, but they will reach it in 3 years. But look at Tripura or Meghalaya. Again, these states are said to be more emancipated, I don't know, this is just general gossip, than other states. And yet they are going to take longer than they were earlier going to take. So if you look at South India, you look at Karnataka, from 120 years, it's going to take 42 years, and so. So data doesn't allow this continual rhetoric that gives us a false position of what is being done in the justice sector to accommodate women when you see it in this way. And when you see these women, and I think Vijay has mentioned this, wherever you see women are in large numbers and you think, well, this is a great improvement, indeed it is, but they will always be clustered in the lower ranks. By the time you get to High Court judge, by the time you get to SPs and SIs and DGs and IGs, you will find that their numbers shrink hugely. these are the kinds of things that data can actually show you. And this is where the value of it lies. This, I think, is important for policymakers to realize. This was an indication, the longer the line, the worse it is. And the red lines means that between the two reports, things have got worse. This is showing you how much effort courts are making to reduce cases pending for more than 5 years. This is going to be how long it's going to take for the backlog of 5 years to be cleared and how many cases are pending over there. But at the same time, it shows you also the Herculean efforts that are being made by an understaffed judiciary. And by that, I don't mean only judges, but I mean court management systems and all of the support systems that should be helping a court to reduce its 5-year backlog, as well as to improve its court clearance. That is the time between the initiation of a case and how long it takes to get cleared in each court. And our colleagues at Daksh and Vijay have done all of this work, but visualizing it in this way really does show up how much effort it does take to reduce these backlogs. And after the corona, where there must be so much pent-up dispute resolution awaiting in the wings, we have yet to see the effect of that to come into view in 2022 and in 2023. And the economic loss from all of this, the loss to development, the loss to business, the loss to commercial enterprise, those things beg to be examined and researched from this kind of database. So we also did a study because, it can be really depressing for everybody to keep on seeing what defects there are, or shortfalls there are. So we looked and saw what was the changes or how many changes were made and where were they made between the two reports. So as you can see, police, prisons, judiciary, and legal aid all in different colors. And on the extreme right, you will see that we could find 53 comparable indicators. Not all indicators are comparable. So we could see these 53, and out of that, we saw that Bihar made the most changes, and in Bihar, it was the police where the changes were most evident, and in legal aid, but not so much in the judiciary and not so much in prisons. Now, that doesn't mean that the prison department or the judiciary is being lazy or lackadaisical. It is what improvements are possible are a function of budgets and functions of policy changes, of which many of these pillars, particularly the prisons, have no control. Often it can just be the efforts of one person heading up a department, like you will see in Andhra Pradesh and you will see in Telangana in prisons, where you had two very dynamic heads and things changed a great deal. But again, as I keep saying, all of this is just baseline data on which people can build their stories. So you're getting a sense now of what could be the applications of the IJR. As I mentioned, it's the competition with self and others, the possibility of civil society groups that are often in confrontation or in engagement with policymakers, with heads of departments, with judges, with legal aid, to talk from a baseline that is undeniable. If it is deniable, and we have had this denial from state secretaries, etc., when we have pointed out a piece of data, they have brought out their own internal files and said, no, your data is wrong, we've got better data. But this is the data that, let's for example say Maharashtra or Chhattisgarh sends upward to the national grid. So there is a whole problem of data validity, data credibility, data checking, all of which begs to be reformed. And so if you say to someone like me that we have got better data internally, well, you are creating parallel systems, and how will you ever get the policy prescription right? How will you get budget allocations from the center if the center sees data in different ways than the state data actually is? Again, as I said, the disaggregation shows up fault lines and low-hanging fruit. The other interesting thing is that looking at the data and the trends, you can see patterns and paces of change. And so you can make projections. And finally, we hope that what we did across the country would find imitators in very local jurisdictions. It would be so interesting to see, for instance, in 2 districts of Karnataka, what is the justice delivery system? How does it compare? How does one city like Hubli compare with Bangalore? So the replication of this kind of modeling in localized areas by people who are interested in this kind of thing would be really, I would consider it a great success. And the other thing, a last thing that I would like to say is that one of the differentials we saw, which I think that Vijay did point out, was the difference between justice delivery in the rural and justice delivery in the urban. I think if there was a bias in the India Justice Report, it was towards individual access to justice. When you have a police station serving several hundred square miles in a rural area, and you have a police station in South Delhi serving 12 kilometers and a much smaller population, even though it may be denser, you have to ask yourself, who can access justice with the same speed? And of course, quality is a matter that we have not measured, but it's something to be thinking about. So we did have this bias that everybody, wherever they lived, anywhere across the country, should have the same ability to access justice, especially if you cut it in terms of economic indicators. The poorest of the poor, the richest of the rich, surely there should be weightage in how you get to that justice when you need it. Our advocacy goes around these kinds of general directions. One of the things we would like to see, and it would be a grand thing if it did happen, would be to have the public policy discourse talk about justice delivery as being an essential service, as essential as health or education. If you can have a primary school in every village and a primary health care center, and people would really look askance at you if you didn't, then why can't you have a small unit that is able to refer you to or deliver justice in that same village or in that small cluster of villages? So the other thing we said was to undertake performance reviews. And I think we should undertake a performance review of our own slide because we've left out the E. So it was to undertake performance reviews. Now, whenever we talk to policymakers, we talk about this. You have inquiries, you have commissions. Why don't you have client group audits? How satisfied are you with the court system? How satisfied are you with the response that you got from 5 police stations in a certain district? And are those performance reviews, when you compare them, when you compare Hubli to, say, Bangalore, are people more satisfied in Hubli? In that case, why are they more satisfied? Are they more satisfied in Bihar than they are in Kerala? Why? Then you can go to another level rather than this disengagement with the delivery system, which is paid for by taxpayers and which is for them. You are merely a public servant. And yet you refuse to put yourself up for examination by your client group. Again, you see our biases when we say prioritize police stations and chowkis rather than headquarters. Prioritize the resources available for legal services institutions because we feel that they have a large mandate, not only 80%, but to deliver the constitutional message all across India. But they're not given enough money to do this, and they're not held to account to do this. So that could change things so rapidly, because it would give agency to a social system that sees itself living not under the constitution, but under the realities of their own societies. Then is there, I'm not sure about this, but is there something to be said to upskill Nyaya Panchayats? To show them, to upskill them, to deliver justice via constitutional principles and not the local bias, and yet marry the two, the culture and the context and the constitution, to come up with viable solutions for conflict resolution in communities, to bring peace locally. Then, of course, we are very hot on diversity. We want it to happen. We want the hiring to prioritize it, and for states to be able to show this in their data. And the upskilling of all functionaries, because what we found was that training schools are terribly neglected and really do not skill up people to deliver on the job that they are supposed to be doing, whether it is the constabulary, dare say, whether it is high court judges or IGs of police. Now, just before I do stop talking, since we are all practitioners here and you are fellows of some tremendous seniority, I mean, people like Osama, I know how very senior and experienced they are. I would like you to tell us, how do you see the advocacy, the pathways for this advocacy, the kind of advocacy that we are engaged in? Where do you see the touch points? How do you see us working at it for more success? Is there a place for any of this in your own work? Are there points from which we can further this report? Are there things that we can add which are missing maybe? We have to stick to our USP of capacity and objective observance, because if we did not, we would get lost in the noise. And it's too soon for us to be diversifying. We have to create an understanding of what we are trying to do before we make further steps. But within that frame, I hope you can address some of the questions that I have left with you. Thank you.
I'll just read quickly a couple of comments that came in the chat. The first one is from Sanjay Hazarika, and he said, I think that the editors have to review the states under AFSPA or have a footnote as this is changing in 3 states as it has been being removed. Assam, sorry, has not been removed from large parts of Assam, parts of Manipur and Nagaland.
Sorry, as one of the editors of the report, yes, of course, we will follow that very closely. and review?
The second one is from Mosumi Panda, and she says, excellent suggestion. Monitoring and evaluation is the least important things. Even NALSA doesn't do any audit. It just reports number of people who have been given a legal aid lawyer. What happens to those cases, no one knows. It's poor quality justice for poor people, least important things for government bodies. This is a comment.
I just wanted to thank Dr. Raghavan and Ms. Daruwala for that amazing session, for walking us through it all, and the compendium of comparison and the importance of like localization of that work in respective organization and respective line of works. Thanks, Subhashish, for pulling those questions from the chat. I would encourage people to actually unmute themselves and elaborate on what they've put in the chat. And ask further questions if need be. So the floor is open. Anybody wants to go first? Mosmi?
Yes, I would go. So this is just more like a suggestion as somebody who is just a junior criminal professional researcher. So from this end, I mean, like, I feel that this document in times to come should become, because this is like a fairly new practice, and it's been 2 years that this report has now been coming up. So I think this should be picked up by media houses. This should be picked by digital media houses, and it should become a document to look forward as, such as the crime statistics, the prison statistics, or the national statistics that we have, and become like an important document, just like the budget that we look forward to.
You know, Maya, if I can come in, I'm Gagan here. You know, one of the things Vijay had asked me to also just speak a little bit on the actual during the pandemic, what happened and how did the A to J system function. And you know, we operate in a couple of states, and we have basically brought in the concept of paralegalism since about 10 years, and now it is part of the District Legal Service Authority. And the Justice Report monitors the appointments of paralegals across the states and districts, and the deficit that still exists in the first rung of what I call the access to justice system. So if you see, there is the normal listing ratio is about 4 to 6 paralegals per lakh of population. And when we were comparing it with the healthcare system, if you see the pandemic, that is the frontline workers, the ASHA workers who really did a lot of work. But the pandemic also threw up the whole issue of 200 million migrants who were working, who were locked out, who were not given wages. And we started asking the institution of the Legal Service Authority, is this your role? And if you look at the Legal Service Authority Act, they have a disaster management scheme. And they didn't know about it. They said, no, that's not our job. We had to actually show them district by district the law to say, you have to intervene. And where do you intervene? You intervene in 2 places. One, Supreme Court saying that, you know, those migrants who had been arrested or by the police for breaking the central law of coming out cannot be put in, should be released. And we said it's the Legal Service Authority who should now work on this. And some of them were angry, some of them complied. But my point I'm trying to say is, when the system doesn't even know what their job is, and especially when you have a Legal Service Authority and you are only spending, you know, what you're saying is 1 rupee odd paisa, the question is, what should be the public expenditure on the lowest? And, you know, Vijay was saying, well, we have increased the expenditure from 1.1 rupee to 1.2 rupees, great. But we, on the ground, when we say, where is that money going? The money actually goes to buy a new vehicle, which then carries the family of the district judge. So I'm giving you some of the real-time stories when we are actually pushing them to do their job, and they say they didn't even know that this is their job. But let me tell you the larger contradiction that we are facing in actually implementing the access to justice on the ground. You see, structurally, a health service, and somebody was saying, it's a good idea to look at that model. The health services model is run by a separate system and then monitored by the secretary, and there's another system which monitors it. In this case, you have a district legal service authority, and if it is not functioning, and if I have to complain that it's not functioning, I have to go to the same district judge who is actually the chairman of the district legal service authority. So you look at this conflict of interest. Can I complain to the person, you are not doing your job, to the same person who is supposed to be doing their job? These are some of these institutional sort of issues that we are also struggling with, that should legal services be separate and not managed by the courts. The courts can be the spaces to adjudicate that they are, when the system doesn't work. So, so similarly, when we got thousands of workers who were locked up in factories, who were being beaten up by the police. And you saw visuals of that. And when we went to them to say, this is your job, and they said, no, it's not our job. And how do you ask them to intervene? And some of them did, sort of, when you actually did, some states, some district judges took up this issue, but largely it was absent. And therefore, again, my last distinct, when you have such, Maya was talking of capacity building. You know how many days a paralegal volunteer is trained in for? 2 days and 2 hours. And I was actually invited by one district judge to organize the design of that training. And I went a couple of 100 kilometers to sit with them. And he had called all his bunch of lawyers. And we had this meeting for 4 hours, of which for 3.5 hours, we were discussing what would be the menu of the food. And it was the last 10 minutes, we said, oh, okay, you speak something, you speak something. This is the level of investment we look at when we talk of upskilling. So, and this is where I think Ashokas, universities have to play a far more serious role. I just thought I'll just flash a few ideas to you, some of us who are struggling with this on the ground, with thousands of paralegals trained. And if you actually go and see who those paralegal volunteers are, most of them now, in the last couple of years, are, because now they've started getting a stipend, some of them have been given more, some states, you see who are they. And they are nothing but cadres of a particular party. What is the selection process? Do they have an exam to give? Nothing. So we have to look at some of these larger systemic issues also when we start looking at comparing it to the health system and comparing that paralegal volunteer with that ASHA worker, who is the ASHA worker who actually saved this country, not the doctors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sethi. Are there any other questions? I think Apar wrote something in the chat as well. Do you want to take the floor, Apar?
Thank you. And this is really important work. It's really useful. I've gone through the first edition of the report and I have high hopes for this edition as well. Congratulations to all the authors. And please do continue this excellent work because it does perform a very vital function in the law and justice community. It provides us a real sense of how much progress is being made, what accountability is being driven. Some questions and some comments on this. First is the data in this report also going to be available boiled down to the district level, which can actually help in resource allocation for specific courts, which may be there within states by itself? And second is that just in terms of continuing with this theme of resource allocation, I've sometimes noticed that judicial delays are are by itself considered a problem much more on the national policy level in the frame of ease of doing business, where I do find it useful that the report is building in elements which are much more largely towards social justice, of representation of women in the entire criminal justice system, from the police to the courts, essentially. So I would recommend that that may be maintained, or those components may be added as this report develops over a period of time. Finally, for greater degrees of resource allocation, at least from the central and the state governments, some degree of recognition for this report for within the National Economic Survey also may be useful. So I hope this is of some use.
Thank you. As far as the data is concerned, I don't think we've gone as deep as disaggregating and putting in the report district level data, though my colleagues are here. But if you want, when by the time the website comes up, which should be sometime toward the end of the year or the third quarter of the year, then we intend to put up as much of the raw data in actual terms and figures that is available, so that it's all together in one place. Yes, the ease of doing business has had a lot of effect. The reports on ease of doing business have had a lot of effect on policy changes because you could show where there was economic loss, or where, more interestingly, there might be economic gain. And one of the things that we are talking with other colleagues, etc., about is how do we bring in, with some credibility, the argument that a little bit of improvement in the delivery of justice, whether it's at the end of the judiciary, or whether it is getting rid of so many under trials in the prisons, or whether it is in terms of filling in vacancies, whether the cost-benefit analysis will show that there are false economies being made, and things could improve vastly with just a little bit of investment in the right place. But it's going to take a fair amount of effort. Vijay?
So district level data, I think Vale is the best person to confirm this, but we don't have that kind of district level data breakup. The Government of India reports do not publish the data at the district level. It is only at the state level, which is why I think we also have not been able to bring it down to the district level. That's as far as that point is concerned. I just wanted to add a bit about, from where Gagan left off, with regard to how the pandemic has affected the justice delivery system. Since my work base is more in Maharashtra, and I know the situation quite well in Maharashtra, it can be taken as an example of what may be happening in some of the other states. In these 2 years of the lockdown, the courts virtually came to a standstill. Except for urgent bail hearings, no trials were held. And the pendency of cases has really shot up in these last 2 years in the criminal courts. I'm sure in other courts as well, but I do not have information about that. And the outcome of that is that the overcrowding of prisons is going to really become a serious problem in the coming year. One example of that is in Maharashtra, the official capacity of prisons in the state is about 23,000. Before the pandemic, that was before March 2020, the population in Maharashtra prisons was in the region of 31,000. So from an official capacity of 23,000, the actual population was somewhere in the region of 31,000. It went up to about 35,000. And then the Supreme Court appointed high-powered committees recommended that in order to maintain social distancing, the population should be brought down by half. So it recommended various categories of sections of the law whereby these prisoners could either be released on bail, temporary bail, or parole. And they said that 17,500 prisoners should be released, so that from 35,000 it can come down to about 17,500, which would then make it possible to have a semblance of social distancing. However, despite the recommendations of the High Powered Committee, which is a 3-member body chaired by the chairperson of the State Legal Services Authority, and the other 2 members being the Home Secretary of the state government and the DG Prisons, the actual number of people who were released on bail or parole was 10,000. And the reason for this was that district courts, judges and magistrates are extremely reluctant to release people on bail. The general feeling is that once you release these people on personal bond, because most of these people were to be released on personal bond, they would not turn up in court and the pendency of the cases would increase. And they are often being monitored in terms of their disposal of cases. District court judges and magistrates are being monitored in terms of what is their ability to dispose of cases, because everybody knows from Supreme Court downwards that we have a huge pendency of cases. So instead of releasing 17,500, about 10,000 were released. Now today, the population in the state prisons is again gone up to beyond 31,000. And one of the senior prison officers was telling me that once the Epidemic Act is removed, once the coronavirus problem goes away, or at least becomes more manageable, and it's already in that on that route, the population of prisons in Maharashtra may go up to 51,000 if these 10,000 people come back. Because once the Epidemic Act is removed, all those 10,000 people who are on bail would have to come back because they'll have to surrender. And then his projection was that our prison population in the state would go up to 51,000. Now that is an absolutely disastrous situation that we are talking about. Already, recently, we came to know that in Pune, which has an official capacity of about 2,300 prisoners, there are around 6,500 prisoners there. And all this is because trials have been completely held up. And I think courts are just not waking up to this fact that there is a need to, of course, now courts have started functioning, but there has to be a concerted effort to ensure that there is quick disposal of cases, and also larger numbers of people are released on bail, which is not happening at all. In fact, what is happening is that rather than we talk about the Justice Krishna judgment of bail and not jail should be the rule, it's become the other way around now. It's jail and not bail. Most people are not being granted bail, and if they're being granted bail, they are in such tough conditions. I'm also aware of the situation in Uttarakhand, where I'm a member of a 3-member committee set up by the High Court of Uttarakhand to look at prison conditions there. And there I found the same situation. Judges are refusing, even for a small case of theft, bail is being refused by the lower courts and people are having to go to High Court to get bail. So it's a very, very serious situation that we are confronted.
Thank you, Dr. Raghavan, for that. And thank you, Ms. Daruwala. I see Mr. Hazarika has his hand up, and I saw a few questions. Please take the floor, Mr. Hazarika, and in the interest of time, I think this would be one of the last questions that we'll have for the panel.
So this has been a very interesting presentation. I would only make 3 or 4 comments, picking up from what Vijay said, this very finely argued set of points that he made about the not just the horrendous conditions in jail, which we're all familiar with, but also the fact that conditions are going to get worse. They're not going to get better because the overcrowding will continue. And the pandemic, which I'm sorry to disappoint you, but it's not going away. So we are on the edge of a 4th wave, so it's not going away. And that's why it's important, I think, for the editors of the IGR to look at the issue of health as, I don't know how you will do it, how you can do it, but bring in the issue of health, whether it's in the failure of the justice system, to do what the High Power Committee suggested, of the prison system to have enough doctors and certainly enough psychiatrists to deal with mental stress. I think you need to bring that in a bit more into the report. That's one thing I would suggest. The second thing, picking up again on what I think Mr. Sethi had talked about migration. The figures for migrants in the country is 400 million. It's not 250 or 120. There are 400 million Indians who are migrants in this country. They go for marriage, they migrate for business, they migrate for livelihoods, education, work, including brick kiln workers and laborers who go from site to site, cross district and cross states. And that's not my figure, that's a World Bank figure built on government data. So it's a massive, massive problem. And I think it's very important that we are able to bring this challenge into the IGR, which I think should be called the IIR, the India Injustice Report, because we're not getting any closer to justice in this country. Every day tells us. The question is, how could you do that in terms of the migrants? In fact, I'm very glad that as the head of CHRI a year and a half ago, soon after the thing began, the pandemic began, I urged the head of my program handling RTI to look at the issue of migrants and so on. And we were able to push the Central Information Commission to wrap the government across the knuckles and tell them within a week, present the data as to how many migrants. So the government said, we have no data, the Labour Commissioner. So it is a huge issue. How do you bring that into this process of justice? Because it is one segment of society that is completely left out. Two other quick points. On the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, since the government has taken a decision not to repeal it, but to remove it by using a clause within the system, within the act, which is to withdraw it from areas where it's not required. This is going to be the pattern for the region, for the Northeast, not for Jammu and Kashmir. So you'll be safe to keep Jammu and Kashmir in the list of states which are unique and therefore not covered by the IGR, but I think you would need to have at least a footnote that indicates that these other states will now be brought under the scanner of the IGR or the IIR. Finally, I would request panelists kindly not to be casual about referring to states like Meghalaya or the sacrifice of doctors who have died. ASHA workers have done a great deal, but doctors have saved millions of lives. And I speak as a brother of a doctor and a family where we've had to deal with some of these issues. So please not be flippant. This is a factual-based report. You need to be factual also in your remarks. Thank you.
All right. I mean, looking through the report and also through the session, the question that I constantly had was the disaggregation aspect. What do you do if the data isn't disaggregated? For example, and it's been brought up in the report as well, like caste data isn't so uniformly collected that it can be compared across all states and subsystems. So how does one go about tackling that bottleneck, as well as the implementation of the funds? So the report rightly monitors the fund utilization, and the implementation aspect was something that I was struggling with. How does one measure the implementation over a period when it comes to justice delivery?
I'm not sure that I understood the question well, Meghna, but how do we monitor the implementation of we can monitor trends, whether last year you used more or last year you used less, if we're looking at budgets. But whether the budget was used properly, let's say we're talking about modernization. Now, modernization allows you to have, modernization itself has its problems. You know, it gives you big ticket items like capital expenditure. So you can buy, you can build a building, or you can buy a lot of equipment for your forensics labs. But when there's I don't know whether I'm answering your question properly, but
Maya, I wanted to add.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. One thing we need to understand about the justice sector is that.
Just be a little loud. Sorry.
About the justice sector, the first thing to, I think, understand and absorb is that while there might be an impression, at least for judiciary and police, that there are enough funds, the fact is that we spend less than 1% on the justice sector as a whole nationally. No state comes close to spending 1% on its judiciary. So the sector as a whole is severely deficient in the financial resources. There is a problem of utilization of the resources, and that is across the board. Coming to specifically how IGR addresses it, we look at, as Maya was saying, utilization of certain central grants, the Modernization Fund, NALSA, certain schemes. We will also be looking at, I don't know if it will be rankable, but we will be looking at the central infrastructure development of judiciary, the central scheme, and say for CCTNS and so on going forward. The other way that the IGR frames the focus towards fiscal priority towards justice sector is by that indicator which says what is the difference between the rate of expenditure of the state and the rate of expenditure on a certain pillar. So there you clearly see that there is a big gap. So no state is basically prioritizing its funds towards the justice sector. So these are a few ways in which we are looking at fiscal allocation, its implementation in terms of only utilization. We're not actually looking at where the money has been used. That's not what we're doing. But yes, that needs to be done.
I just want to add one more thing is that largely this report is not an outcome-based report. It's more a capacity-based report. What is the capacity to deliver justice? Because if we were to go on to an outcome-based report, we would have to bring in a whole lot of new indicators. And a lot of the time, for those indicators, data may also not be available. That's one. Two is when you're talking about budgets and expenditures, it is often based on what the particular state government includes under a particular head. So I'll just give you an example. There is a budget head called spend per inmate in prisons. Now, suddenly you will find from one year to the other that the spend per inmate has suddenly shot up or has tremendously gone down. Now that makes you wonder how come this has happened. And when you dig deeper, because you have your connections with the department and you talk to them and say, how has this suddenly gone up or how is it suddenly? You realize that some babu in the department has shifted some particular expenditure item from this head to that head. And that is how the whole thing has changed. So there are a lot of things with regard to data, particularly because it's government data that we have no control over. And so some of the things that will keep happening, and we'll have to keep explaining when somebody notices this and says, how has Maharashtra's spend per inmate gone up or gone down by 50%? And then there is no logical explanation for it, except that certain types of expenses which were earlier included in spend per inmate have now been taken out and put somewhere else or vice versa.
And I also love the trends aspect of the report where, the diversity is being mapped over and then there's extrapolation of that data. And even with respect to funds, there's capacity and the training personnel, that aspect as well. So thank you for that.
No, I wanted to take up the point that Gagan said and really have a discussion on it, wanted to understand it. Gagan, the trend within NALSA seems to be to reduce paralegals. You are fighting for paralegals to be better trained and better, better resource so that they can be a resource for the community. And that's how for years and years we have also thought about it when you and I have been working together. But the trend within NALSA's policy and also within the secretaries is to say that we don't want these paralegals. They are all political. They are all nuisance. We can't monitor them. We can't correct them. We are unnecessarily paying them. We don't have enough money to pay them on a regular basis. And by and large, we have so many underemployed lawyers at the district court level. Why don't we take them on and train them to be pro bono defenders rather than this? What do you think about that?
Maya, this has been an old discussion because, I was part of the drafting committee of the Nyay Panchayat with Upendra Bakshi. And the whole thing was being taken under the Panchayat ministry. Overnight, and everything was done. The bill went to the parliament, and within 2 days, they drafted another one, which was the one lung lower judiciary, and came up with this and passed it through. And that just meant more judges at the lower court and still one more lower court. And it's not functioning because they haven't built those courts yet. So I think there is a larger fight of the institution of judiciary not wanting to give up their space and start coordinating with many other bodies to set up an access to justice delivery system. So I think there is a larger politics to that. And that's what Vijay says. Wale was saying, where should the money be spent of that 1% of the GDP? Or is it 1%? I don't think so. It's even 1% of the GDP. If it was 1% of the GDP, it would be huge.
Not 1%.
I think we need to have that as the larger advocacy point. How much percentage of GDP should go to access to justice, of which how much should go bottom up? The health system only became better in this country after we spent big amount of resources at the lower healthcare system. This is now very clear. But and I'm sorry, I'm going to use harsher words, the upper caste control on the judicial system is also very clear, and they don't want to give up power. Who becomes a judge, and that diversity which we are fighting for, we know that there are very few Dalit judges in the high courts, in the Supreme Courts. So there is the caste system, which is equally, and the paralegal volunteers will be largely Dalits, tribals. Why should we entertain those? So I think in the meta, these kind of issues are also running in our politics.
Just half a minute about the paralegal volunteers. Again, I'm talking more in terms of my experience within Maharashtra. But I find that the pandemic has actually, to some extent reversed this idea that we don't need paralegals. I'm finding that a lot of DLSAs are now talking about hiring paralegals and training them. They've even approached us to help them with some of the trainings. The other thing I also find that a lot of law students are now being enrolled as paralegals.
Exactly.
It's not only these political party representatives. At least I don't find a lot of that here. What I find is a lot of law students being enrolled and trained as paralegal volunteers.
Sure. I think Maharashtra and some states are, Chhattisgarh, that is happening. And a lot of civil society actors also working in that combination. But UP, Bihar, the big states, MP, that's what is happening as per our information.
Right.
Thank you, everybody. This was a super session.